It's time once again for another episode of Atlanta Legal Experts Radio, broadcasting live from the Pro Business Channel studios in Atlanta. And now here's your host, Emily-Rowell.
Good morning. This is Emily-Rowell here with Peachtree Offices. I am your host for Atlanta Legal Experts Radio. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're so excited today. We've got a full house this morning, and I've got Rich-Casanova here, going to play the co-host this morning.
Absolutely. Got a packed room this morning, and very excited to hear from these subject matter experts and dive right into another episode of Atlanta Legal Experts.
I am too.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful day once again with an amazing, or $1 million view, or at least $500,000, 3/4. I don't think that you don't charge us for the view, but it is an amazing view here in Buckhead. And so let's kind of just maybe welcome folks joining us here in the studio.
Absolutely. I have Jason Swindle with Swindle Law. Good morning.
Good morning, Emily.
And you and Dane Garland, also with Swindle Law, are here
morning.
this morning to talk about.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about my book, The Verdict is In, and that deals with the criminal justice system nationwide, particularly here in Georgia.
Thank you very much. We're excited to hear that. I also have James Griffin with me with James Griffin Law.
Hi.
That was very creative. No.
In law, you can't come up with fancy law firm names very easily.
That's true.
Yes.
So tell me what you'll be discussing this morning.
I do estate planning, do probate work, do estate administration, and that's what I do.
Yay. And we also have, last but not least, and she'll actually be first this morning, Lisa Simpson-Hoover. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Emily. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. And what do you focus on?
I am an auto accident attorney. The formal name is personal injury attorney, but I like to refer to it as an automobile accident attorney. And I focus primarily on cases where someone's involved in an automobile accident and they are injured and they need representation, or if a person is in a slip and fall and they need representation because they're injured.
Thank you so much. Well, we're excited for everybody. And I just want to quickly mention our sponsors this morning. We have Peachtree Offices that help establish attorneys in the Atlanta area. We also have 3A Law Practice Management as a sponsor, and they help attorneys start and build their practice. And we have Atlanta's own John Marshall Law School. You can see all of their links to their websites on atlantalegalexperts.com. So we're going to start because we have a packed room. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Lisa Simpson. And I wanted to get started with your bio, if I can find it. So tell me, how did you get started in law? What got you started?
Well, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And at the time, most of my friends were going to law school. And I said, well, let me try law school. And so that's how I actually started, enrolled in law school. Although I will say that after my first year, when I got involved with the trial team, I realized that was my passion and that was something that I wanted to do. And
Sure.
I was very fortunate that I was able to get involved in the trial team because a lot of attorneys get burned out early on in their career. I think it's important that if you start out with something that you really love, you tend to have longevity as an attorney. And so I started out primarily at the DA's office as a trial attorney, had a trial within the first week of the job, and
Wow.
been rolling ever since. So,
And it says you've been practicing for over 20 years.
I have. I have.
Don't look it at all.
Well, thank you. That it's a double-edged sword, Emily. It works to my advantage on the one hand because sometimes I'm underestimated, but on the other hand, if I walk into a courtroom, the judge is wondering if I'm something other than the attorney.
Sure. So you leverage an insurance defense litigation background, which I'm sure helps with your clients that are trying to get, satisfied from their accidents.
Absolutely. That's what makes me unique as a personal injury auto accident attorney. I leverage that background. In fact, my kind of elevator speech to people is I used to work for the insurance company. Now I work for you. So I'm kind of an insider, but on your side now. I leverage that background. I know how insurance companies think. I know how they evaluate cases. I know how to package a case with their language so that they understand and appreciate that. And I don't in any way hesitate to let the claim rep know on the front end that I used to work for a large insurance company.
Right. That's smart. And you also were, and we're going to be talking about criminal law here a little bit later in the show, you were a criminal prosecutor.
I was a criminal prosecutor in Florida for about 4 years, and that's been really helpful in my personal injury practice, at least from the standpoint of just having litigation background. And
I would say so.
Yeah.
So you're like a triple-edged sword.
Well, you're very kind and generous, Emily. Thank you.
So tell me, what are the 3 pieces of advice that you would give somebody that has been in an auto accident?
The first thing is important is to identify any witnesses. Insurance companies are in the business of making money, and if they can find a way to weasel their way out of paying on a claim, they will. And so from the very beginning, when you're involved in an automobile accident, you have to be proactive, really be thinking about how you can protect your interest. And so I think the first thing is to identify any witnesses. Take photographs is the second piece of advice I would give to someone that's involved in an automobile accident. And the third piece of advice, which is really huge, and a lot of folk don't really know this, and that is to never give a recorded statement, never have any actual contact with the other driver's insurance company. That's something that folk don't know. They kind of get confused, and you'll get that call from that claim rep from the other driver's insurance company, the at-fault driver's insurance company, asking will you give a recorded statement. And most folk are like, well, sure, I'll give a recorded statement. And you're basically undermining your claim because, again, insurance companies are in the business of making money. And if they're asking you for a recorded statement, they're looking for information that's going to advance or protect their interests, not protect you.
Got it.
So those are the 3 pieces of advice I would give to someone involved in an automobile accident.
And then call your lawyer.
Yes. That would be the third thing, but that would be the fourth thing. But those 3 things, if you do those 3 things, you're protecting yourself so that if you wait a couple weeks to contact the attorney or a month to contact the attorney, you've at least preserved your interest and protected your interest.
How about your insurance company? Would you call your insurance company pretty soon after the accident?
Absolutely. You are required. You are actually obligated to contact your insurance company. Under the terms of your insurance policy, if you pull out your policy, it'll say that if you're involved in an automobile accident, one of your obligations as an insured is to contact your insurance company and let them know that you were involved in an automobile accident. And it's important to understand who the players are. That's one of the things I tell clients. Who's the players at your insurance company or is it the other driver's insurance company? Make sure you know who you're talking to when you have that phone conversation.
Gotcha. So tell me, do you take every client that walks in the door?
That's a very good question, Emily, and I don't. I don't. In fact, I'm very critical about the types of cases that I take. It's important for first fault to be clear on the part of the other person. There are some cases that I will take that are where it's not clear who's at fault, but I'm very honest with clients, and I share with them, you don't want to get into a situation where you're fighting over who's at fault. We want to be able to fighting over the damages, your injuries. We don't want to spend our time jumping through hoops finding out who's at fault. We want to know that the other person's at fault. And that's not to suggest that I'm only going to take easy slam dunk cases because there's no such thing as an easy slam dunk case. And I think that there's some instances where I will take a case where fault is not clear. So, for example, if it's a slip and fall, and it's at a movie theater or something, and we've got to prove that the movie theater was at fault. They failed to do something. They failed to clean. Well, that can be kind of sketchy. It's kind of difficult. But that's a case that I might consider taking. But in an automobile accident, you want to know that the other driver's at fault.
And again, reminding our listeners, you're listening to Atlanta Legal Experts Radio with your host, Emily-Rowell, and your producer, engineer, co-host, Rich-Casanova here. A couple of questions, Lisa. Speaking of cases, what's the biggest case you've had come through your doors?
The biggest case I had was against the city of Chicago. It was in 2010, and it reads like a novel.
Wow.
I represented the estate of a woman and her son who were killed in an automobile accident on the south side of Chicago. They were on their way to their church. The woman was on her way to clean her church, and she was with her son. And City of Chicago Police Department was chasing a person who was going in excess of 90 miles an hour on a city street. And during the course of the chase, they crashed into him, and he crashed into her car, and she was killed on site.
Wow.
I represented her estate and her son. case went on for about 5 years,
Oh my
winded
gosh.
up in a 10-day trial in the city of Chicago.
So you took on the whole city of Chicago.
Yeah,
Just
I can
Lisa
imagine
against the
that
city.
lasting a little longer
Yeah.
than normal.
And you mentioned Chicago. It mentions in your bio that you hold a license in 5 states.
I do, you know,
What are those, and where's your concentration? I guess obviously probably in Atlanta, Georgia.
my concentration's in Georgia and primarily Atlanta, Chicago, and I do get some cases out of the Maryland area, but I'm licensed in Florida, D.C., Maryland, Illinois, and Georgia. And just in terms of the history, I graduated from law school in Florida.
Oh.
That's the Florida bar. Moved to Illinois. That's the Illinois bar. And, of course, moved to Georgia, so I waved into Georgia. Now, the D.C., Maryland connection is I'm from the D.C., Maryland area, and so
Okay.
I thought that maybe one day I
Sure.
might go back there, and so that's why the D.C., Maryland.
Nice. And what part of Florida law school?
I went to I'm a Gator,
Uh-oh.
but don't ask me
All right,
any
well,
football
thanks again for
questions.
joining
But
us.
I'm a
Let's go
Gator.
ahead and-
Go Gators!
Let's go ahead and move on to our next guest
Gator
now.
Nation.
I thought it was just an excuse to go to South Beach or whatever. So final question. I know we got to move on, but speaking of police reports, what if it's just like a, not really a fender bender, but where it appears like there's no damage, you know, and they're like, we're fine, just go ahead. I mean, is there a case where you don't call the police or contact your insurance because there could be repercussions, or sometimes it's just you look at, you know, bumpers hit, there's not even any paint. I mean, how do you determine to engage the police or, you know, move forward or not?
I think you have to just use your common sense. I mean, in an abundance of caution, it might be just a good idea to contact your insurance company and say, hey, I was in a fender bender, because you never know. The other driver could inflate
Right.
the situation and make it seem like it was bigger than it was.
So in every case, you feel like you need a police report, or where do you not need one? I guess. Or
I don't. There are some instances, from my understanding, where the police don't even come out to the scene if there's no actual injury or
Right.
property
Okay.
damage.
Okay.
So there are those cases like that.
especially like you said, if you have photos, or whatever. Yeah.
Sure, but it's important to take photos even if it shows nothing,
Right,
just so
okay.
you have that evidence. Yeah.
Okay. So let folks know the best way to reach out to you and find your contact information.
It's easy, SimpsonHooverLaw.com. Simpson like O.J. Simpson, or Simpson like Bart Simpson, and Hoover like Hoover Dam, or Hoover like the President Hoover, or Hoover like the vacuum cleaner. So SimpsonHooverLaw.com.
Wow.
We will not forget that.
I'm telling you.
Let me just ask you one more quick question. So how do you get new clients? And you said you serve the Atlanta area. Where specifically are you located?
I'm actually in Buckhead, but my clients are all around the Atlanta area, and they're primarily referrals.
That's usually the case for attorneys.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on this morning.
Thank you for
and
having me, Emily.
You're absolutely an expert. I would not want to hit you on the road. Okay, so we will go on to our next guest. But before that, I would like to remind our listeners that we have Peachtree Offices as our sponsors. We have 3A Law Practice Management and also John Marshall Law School. So you can, again, see their information on AtlantaLegalExperts.com, and you'll also be able to see all the guests here today on that website and all of their information, because I'm not going to go through the entire bios or else we'd be here all day, because they're very good at what they do.
Well, and feel
But
free
I
to
will
add to
sum
your
up.
bio or incorporate that in your conversation as well.
Absolutely, yes. So we are going to go now to James Griffin. Good morning.
Good morning, Emily.
How are you this morning?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good, good. Thank you so much for being here. James Griffin Law. He is an estate planner and administrator, probate and property law. And he began practicing law at Morris, Manning, and Martin here in Buckhead. And his solo practice today focuses on estate planning and administration, probate, and property law, as I said. He is particularly concerned about protecting the most valuable heirs through estate planning and trust. And when you have lost a parent and need coaching through the probate process, it's not a bad thing to have a former teacher in your corner who is patient enough to explain the maze of bumps and curves ahead. You had some personal story that happened to you, which I believe got you into where you are today.
Bunches of them, actually. I have a disabled brother, and I am his guardian now. He's older than I am, and I'm his guardian, and he's got disabilities, and I have to deal with all that. And my mom has passed away, so I'm kind of like being dad, and it's sometimes very difficult, and sometimes it has its joys and pleasures too. But
Sure.
when I go do something for Thomas, I always get in the car and I close the door, and I drive away, and I talk to Mom, who's now gone, and I say, I'm doing what you asked me to do.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that's what you do.
That's wonderful. And so you made your career out of it.
I have. And in the last, about 2 years ago, my father got ill, and he quit driving, and he lives with us now. And,
Wow.
and he's 90. So, but when you're 90, and when he hit 90, he's been happy as a lark. It's like he's playing on the house's money. He's a Korean War veteran. He got shot at on his 25th birthday, so he hits
Wow.
90, and this is pretty good.
Right, right.
Gets his grandchildren at Christmas time, and it's a pretty good gig when you're 90. So, but he's a joy to have at our house.
So somebody that's listening and they hear that, you've gone through these things, and then they may have lost a loved one or have a disabled sister or relatives. What do you tell those people?
Well, probably the most important thing is you can plan. You can plan around almost anything.
That's
and
good.
Because of that, doesn't mean you have a perfect plan, but
Sure.
there's always a way to plan something. One of the best ways, the ground floor would be a will. Powers of attorney are very important. That way, if you're in the hospital and say you're laid up for a few days, then there's somebody who can at least go out there and pay your bills or talk to the doctor for you and things like that. So those are good things. Trusts are a very creative way of dealing with things. A lot of people think that a trust is something that only the wealthiest people have. But, for instance, a special needs trust has become a very, very common thing just because if your child has disabilities and is already on, say, supplemental security income, when they hit adulthood, they lose it if they have any assets in their name.
Gotcha.
So
the trust protects them.
The trust protect them from all sorts of troubles you can get.
Yeah. So tell me, what if somebody that's listening has a blended family? How can they plan an estate at that
Well,
point?
blended family is a very difficult thing because a blended family means that the person who's writing a will has two different sets of expectations
Sure.
about what inheritance is, et cetera. And those expectations are always different, very different. There's not a perfect way of doing it. There's an art to it. And
Are you good at doing that?
well,
I bet you he
the
is.
bar prohibits me from saying I'm good. So, but,
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But what it does mean is that you can plan through it. So, for instance, one of the better ways of dealing with it is with insurance. So you can set up part of the family with a life insurance benefit or life insurance annuity, and then keep all the personal stuff that's the family heirloom, et cetera, to your blood children or something like that. That's one solution. But you
Of
have
many.
And you have to be creative. If you're not creative, then you don't need to get into it.
I'd imagine that there's so many different situations that you run into, so you really have to be creative because of that.
Oh, there are.
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine that I grew up with whose father ended up marrying somebody his age, and they ended up having some children. So he's got little brothers who are about the same age as his children.
His
kind of,
children,
right.
yeah.
So there are all kinds of things you got to do sometimes.
Sure.
So there's a notation about your daughter's inheritance, protecting that from your not so responsible husband. You get into step parents or in-law issues, but if you have someone, a family member, and you feel like their spouse is not so responsible, you can kind of how does someone get involved in?
Well, that's
that?
usually a trust matter. So if you really want to be strict, really strict, you can create a generation skipping trust and give whatever it is to the grandchildren and allow your daughter to get the income.
Wow.
Okay. Now that's too restrictive for most people.
Yeah.
There are other ways where you give the daughter a trust to benefit ultimately the grandchildren, and she's in charge of it.
Okay.
And then if her compulsive gambling husband bothers her every week, then she can say, honey, you know what's in the trust document. This is for the children.
Right.
And so that gives her an opportunity to just stand up and be able to essentially deal with somebody who might not be responsible. But taking care of a vulnerable heir is one of the most important parts of estate planning, because everybody has a vulnerable heir. There's always somebody in the family who either doesn't handle money well or is married to somebody who doesn't handle money well, or has medical needs or things like that, mental health issues, alcoholism issues, it's all there. And the creativity is trying to figure out how to take care of those people.
Well, it creates a buffer too, whatever. So it's not it's a little bit out of her control, right? So maybe prevent some arguments or that
Correct.
conflict.
Correct.
So in today's internet, world where everything's kind of at our fingertips, what are some distinctions with someone going online and just getting those services as opposed to contacting someone like yourself, personally?
It's very possible to go on an internet search and find every document pretty much that a lawyer might draft for you.
Right.
The problem is, do you really, really want to sign them?
Right.
And when you sit down to sign them, that's usually, people sometimes call me and say, I've done this do-it-yourself
Right.
thing, and now I've got a kind of a knot in my stomach,
Yeah.
and I'm not really sure I need to be doing this.
That's good.
And so there are do-it-yourselfers. They do it. Sometimes they work. I have a client right now who they did a do-it-yourself will, and it worked out for them.
Right.
But for everyone that happens
probably
like
rare.
that, yeah.
Or could you do kind of a hybrid where maybe a client does a lot of their due diligence, and so they're educated, gets the forms together and so forth, and then presents it to you to review, and obviously there's fees involved for you to review and execute it? Or
That happens sometimes. I think most of the time when people start doing that, a couple look at each other and say, honey, this is not really what we are bargaining for. Let's call somebody.
Well, there's the uncertainty if it's going to hold up, right?
Correct.
And if they filled out the right form as opposed to, even simple forms you start to fill out on the internet, you're like, so am I supposed to be checking this box or the other one, right?
Well, but part of it is most people need counseling. And the reason why they procrastinate doing this is they need counseling.
Yeah.
And the counseling, the hardest part is to figure out who's in charge. Do you need a trust? Well, if you have a trust, you have to have a trustee. Who do you trust to be a trustee?
Well,
Does somebody need a guardian? What if you both go down in the same plane crash? You got one relative who's good with money. That's a good trustee. You got another relative who's got fantastic maternal instincts and abilities, and they take care of your minor children. But most people have to go through a process of really important existential questions
Right.
in order to get to those answers. That's what we do.
I love that. He knows what he's doing, that's for sure.
I'm telling you.
That's
Now,
why he's on the show.
Yeah. Wills and trust. What are some major distinctions? Are they more similar than different, or?
Well, that's a good question. I'll try to answer it as succinctly as I can. A will goes into effect the day you die.
Okay.
And you can write a will and nobody cares what it says until you're dead. That's why you have powers of attorney
Right.
before you're dead. Okay. A trust is a helicopter full of money. And
Sweet.
it lands.
Sign me up for that one, yeah.
Okay.
Me too.
It lands where you tell it to land and when you tell it to land. And the money goes to whomever is in the trust. Now, you could set it up at the end of your will. That's called an executory trust. If I die, there's a trust created for my spouse. Okay. Another way to do it is to set up a trust while you're still alive, which has some other benefits. And it's mainly that the property's not in your name. It actually, just to make a long story short, it's this. If you have all your property in a living trust and then you die, you don't have to probate a will because all the property is already in the hands of the trustee, who's probably your spouse or your child or something like that, who's going to take care of all that property. So that's the short of it, but I don't want to go into all that. No, the listeners will fall asleep with the wheel if we go too long.
Right.
So.
Well, it sounds like you really do know, and especially coming from where you've been, it sounds like you pay special attention to all of your clients. And for those listening, how can they reach you?
They can reach me at gawillsandestates.com.
And I've got you all over social media here.
Oh well,
You're on Facebook.
I'm
And
on
Twitter.
Facebook. I've got a pretty
Pinterest.
Facebook page.
Oh, yeah?
And I'm on Twitter, and I'm on LinkedIn, but I probably do more Facebook than anything else.
Okay.
So
That's where families kind of hang out and stuff and have those kind of conversations or can find you.
Yeah.
for people who are my age, and I'm the last baby boomer born, but we keep up with people by Facebook.
Yeah.
Now, my daughter doesn't really care about Facebook, but people my age care about Facebook.
Yeah, you mentioned that you have a teenage daughter, so in your home there's 3-generation
Yes.
family. I mean, that's unusual in these days and times, but back in the day, that's kind of where people learned, respect. We had a grandmother moving in with us at one point, and as a kid, it's a different perspective, right?
Yes. It's a great connection. When my grandmother died, it was 1985, but the holidays became pretty boring for a number of years because the 3 generations energizes everything.
Oh, yeah.
And when my nephew was born a number of years later, all of a sudden holidays got interesting.
Right.
Thank you so much for being on the show. And without further ado, we will introduce our next guests, Jason Swindle and Dane Garland with Swindle Law.
Good morning.
Good morning. And you guys got creative, too, on the name.
Yes, very creative.
A lot of people say that. It's hard to forget.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll do brief bios on both of you. Jason Swindle is the founder and partner of Swindle Law Group based in Carrollton, Georgia, and he focuses on criminal defense practice. He currently serves as an adjunct professor at the University of West Georgia in the criminology department, and he teaches classes in criminal law and constitutional law. And we also have Dane Garland, and he grew up in East Tennessee.
Go Vols.
Oh, this is going to be an arm wrestling contest here, yeah.
And dogs.
And FSU here, yeah. Bring it on. Lock the door there, Craig, yeah.
And you attended the University of Tennessee, obviously, and graduated with a BA in political science in 2005. After working for a while as a runner with a Knoxville law firm, you decided to go to law school. And in 2006, was accepted to St. Thomas University School of Law. And then you were actually hired by the Carroll County Public Defender's Office as an assistant public defender in 2013.
That's correct.
And came on board with Swindle Law when?
About 2.5 years ago.
Okay. Yeah. So you're still learning.
Yes.
No, I'm just kidding.
No, I'm every day, learning every day.
Yes, so am I.
If you stop learning, then, yeah, you need to move on, yeah.
So we have to talk about what I brought you guys on to talk about, obviously, is your book, The Verdict Is In.
Right.
And basically rehabilitating this wonderful judicial system we have in the state. So tell me what inspired you to write this book.
Well, there were a couple of things that inspired me. First of all, I write a column, have been for about a decade. It's in a number of newspapers in the West Georgia area. It's a legal and sometimes political column. And I've had a number of my readers ask me to put together some of my columns in a book. And I didn't exactly do that, but a lot of the ideas that I have that I've had in the past and written about in the past have gone into this book. And one particular column was important. I interviewed Governor Deal back in 2013. He's been instrumental in some of the positive changes that have been made during his terms as governor. And after I interviewed him, I said, it may be a good idea to draw my experience, my columns, my interview into a book that the general public primarily would be interested in looking at in fixing our criminal justice system.
So it's, I'm sure some cases that you saw, especially early on, also, thought basically the injustice that goes on also helped you. And you have sorry, I'm just at a loss for words right now. Start over again. You have some values that you use throughout the book. There are conservative values. Can you tell me about those?
I'm politically very conservative, and that's unusual for a criminal defense attorney.
I was surprised when he hired me. We're a different spectrum. I'm very liberal, and so I was surprised that he's as conservative as he is.
That's true, which makes us a diverse law firm.
That's true.
But I did apply my conservative principles in writing this book. I actually agree with Governor Deal on a lot of what he's doing. And I think that the primary or the underlying factor for most of this is how do we save money, okay? When you lock up or incarcerate somebody who is a drug addict who is found with a small amount of cocaine over and over and over again, the cost of incarceration is astronomical. When you have things like drug courts, which in the West Georgia area and the metro area we have a number of, you can save a tremendous amount of money. You can put people back to work who will then be paying taxes. And so I think everybody wins when you have that sort of a system in place.
Can you describe more the drug courts, exactly
can.
what they are to the general audience?
Yes. Let's say that, well, first of all, not everybody is eligible for drug courts. Drug dealers, violent offenders, they're just not going to be able to get in. Drug courts are for those people who have addictions to prescription drugs, illegal drugs, and are facing felony charges in a superior court.
Okay.
The drug court team, which is usually consisted of one assistant district attorney, a judge, somebody from the sheriff's office, sort of varies from court to court, will decide on each person who applies. And if you're accepted into the drug court, and again, some of these courts vary by county, but if you complete a 12 to 24-month program, which involves AA, NA meetings, drug screens, lots of accountability things that go into it, then you avoid going to jail or prison, number one, and sometimes you can avoid a conviction in your case.
That probably does save a lot of money because I'm sure the drug courts don't cost as much to operate.
That is correct. And I would say from an economic standpoint, having the drug courts from a countywide perspective and a statewide perspective economically are very beneficial.
And if I may,
Sure.
I'd say 80% of the cases, the open cases that we have, are due to some sort of drug addiction. I mean, it may be a possession case, but it also could be a theft case where someone is stealing something to buy the drugs that they need.
Sure.
And to echo what Jason said, I mean, it's usually 9 times out of 10, it's a nonviolent offense. It's a nonviolent person. It's a person that has this addiction issue. There's also, I think, when you do this and you can pass through it successfully, which is difficult for some of these people,
Sure.
it reduces the recidivism. They don't get in trouble anymore after that. This is sort of the last thing to get them over that hump. It protects law enforcement because they're not stealing, not doing drugs. There's really no downside to it. It benefits the individual, their family, and society as a whole. As he said, the conservative values in it, there's a larger tax base. It takes more money to put these people in jail than it does to put them through drug court. I mean, as I said, there's no downside. I was in Douglasville, just as a short example, getting someone into drug court, and this gentleman is addicted to meth, and he'd had a hard life. And we were standing in front of the judge. He's entering his plea. The judge sentences him to a suspended sentence as long as he passes drug court, and then the entire court began to cheer for him. And it was, you could see him light up. This is something
Sure.
that he, hadn't gone through before. And I'm hopeful that, something like that, him having that sort of thing happen to him in court will help him pass through drug court and become a good member of society.
Yeah, I mean, people can't help what happens to them in the beginning,
Right,
you know?
right.
I mean, we all have hearts. We all, it just sometimes things are rough,
Yeah.
And one thing I will add, too, is there's an accountability aspect, too. If you get into drug court, picking up new offenses, you're using drugs, you're failing drug screens or selling drugs, you're off to prison. There's maybe a little bit of tolerance. If somebody fails one drug screen or two, they may spend a few days in jail. But for anything more than that, there's not much tolerance. It's a tough program.
So it's a rehab, so they stay there?
No, they actually work in the community.
Okay.
And the drug court itself is an administrative office that's located in the courthouse or around the courthouse. Obviously, the AA and NA meetings are around the area, so they're actually doing things in their area without being any sort of an institution.
And they come in
And,
weekly to meet with the judge that's in charge of the drug court to see how's it going. How far along are you in
I
getting your
see.
GED? How did you have a job? You know, those sort of things. So they're
Gotcha,
keeping an
okay.
eye on them, but they're
Right.
still out in society.
Gotcha. Wow. So then they can really live their lives.
Yes.
They can,
And learn how to be a good citizen
if they want to.
if
That's
they
right,
want
if they
to.
want to. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard, but
Yeah.
that's wonderful. So tell me, one of the things you said in the book, Jason, is that the government's here, they're put in place to protect us.
Right.
And so where are they failing and where are they helping in that matter?
Well, I think it goes back to choosing who we incarcerate.
Okay.
Obviously, the government, that's the primary purpose is the government to protect us from a military standpoint, from a civilian standpoint. Violent criminals, sex offenders, child molesters. I am a criminal defense attorney, but I'm a citizen too. And,
Right.
those people sometimes need to be locked up perhaps forever, okay?
Right.
But it doesn't really, by the government locking somebody up or incarcerating them for non-violent offenses, and that can be thefts, that can be forgeries, doesn't have to necessarily be drug cases. I don't think that protects us. It certainly may protect some people from having something stolen, or
Sure.
But when it comes to protecting us from violence and things that we're all really, really concerned about, I think taking people out of the system and placing them again in a drug court or a mental health court, that's something else that we talk about in the book, can steer society where it needs to go and put our government in a position where the government needs to be with
Sure.
its limited purposes.
As a defense attorney, a lot of people ask you, how can you defend these criminals? What's your answer to that?
I've never been asked that question. Well, yeah, I've almost come up with a pat response, and I try not to give that. I try to think it through a little bit every time.
Sure.
But, I do care a lot about my clients. We have a number of clients at our firm. We only do criminal defense, and so we have a number of people in the West Georgia area and the metro area who come to us because they know that's all they do.
There's criminals in West Georgia?
Yeah. We're right on the Alabama line.
Where are
Yeah,
they?
that's
Where are they
scary.
not? Can you give a zip code where they're not? That's where I want to move. Yeah.
I'll get back to you on that. I'll send you an email. So, but there are people that I know they're guilty.
Sure.
And when you get to that, and you know that the person's guilty, and the prosecutor knows the person's guilty, and the evidence points to that, then it goes to mitigation. How can I mitigate the circumstances with this person? Not can I get them off,
Right.
but how can I mitigate the circumstances? Now, sometimes cases have to go to trial. Sometimes we deal with very serious violent felonies, and in that case, it's not my job to judge my client's culpability in the case. That is for the jury. And so my job under those circumstances is to do the best job that I can do at trial, represent my client to the best of my ability, and primarily protect his or her constitutional rights. That's
That was my
really
next
the
question.
key.
I think it goes back to your question of protection. I mean, that's what it is. You need to be protected. Everyone, no matter if it's a shoplifting case or a murder case, everyone needs to be protected from this overarching power that the government has, that the district attorney's office have. And so you could know they're guilty, as Jason said, but it doesn't matter. What would you want done for you if you were in that situation?
Sure. There's a lot of people that are innocent that go to jail.
There are a number of people who do, and this has nothing to do with the book, but over the holidays, didn't realize I had Netflix until my wife told me this, but there is an incredibly shocking documentary called Making a Murderer. Has anybody heard of that?
I have heard. I just heard of it I saw it on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, it took me 12 hours, I think, to watch it. And I won't go into, it
Sure.
would take me a while to go into the details, but it deals with a case in Wisconsin where someone was found guilty of rape, and DNA testing 18 years later exonerated him.
Wow.
Now, there's a lot more to the story that makes
Sure.
it tremendously interesting, but I think after you watch it, you think to yourself, well, it's okay, and it's kind of easy for me as a human to look at somebody else who's been accused of a crime and say, well, they're probably guilty because they got arrested or they're going to trial. But God forbid I ever get accused of a crime.
That's right.
Because I can control whether I commit a crime in the future, but I can't control whether I'm accused of one.
Right.
Sure. So nearly 1 in every 100 American adults is in jail.
I think that's accurate, yes.
Yeah, the numbers were staggering when I read this. I never knew, and I never knew how much money was going towards people, especially the repeat offenders.
Yes.
It's like we're spending all this money on this guy.
Yeah.
You know? And then you also talk about in the mid-1980s, the prison system, let's see, it says the prison systems now cost states more than $50 billion per year, up from $11 billion in the mid-1980s. What's different?
Well, I think the growth in the population
Sure.
overall, probably. Back in the 80s, 70s, and 60s, we had very strict laws on the books, particularly with drug crimes.
Mm-hmm.
I think at one point in Texas, you could just about get the death penalty for having less than 1 ounce of marijuana. At least that's what a judge in West Georgia tells folks when they go in front of him on drug cases. So I would attribute that simply to the population growth of the United States.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
Yeah, speaking of, want to remind our listeners once again, you're listening to Atlanta Legal Experts with your host, Emily-Rowell, and we're speaking with Jason Swindle and Dane Garland with the Swindle Law Group. Speaking of, you've had a lot of references to drugs, and I haven't had a chance to read your book yet, so I don't know if this is covered or you have experiences with. It seems like there's a phenomenon in Atlanta with people coming off of codeine or painkillers and migrating to heroin. And, your average neighbor, your civilian, that's not a criminal type thing. Have you had any interaction with that? Or, the statistics from what I heard, just alarming.
Well, it's interesting. In Carroll County, we typically see the effects of what's happening in metro Atlanta
Right.
maybe 2 years down the road. I know you didn't ask this question, but, gang activity, for
Right.
instance, we're seeing a lot of that in the West Georgia area. But going back to your question regarding heroin use, yes, I think that we now have 2 cases in our law office dealing with possession of heroin or possession with intent to distribute. That's something I haven't seen in years.
Right.
So I'm not surprised by what you tell me is going on in Atlanta with that, but we're starting to see it, so I certainly believe it.
Yeah. And I know we have probably a few other questions, but let us know, you're speaking about your book. Remind our listeners the name of the book title and where they find the book.
Well, the name of the book is The Verdict is In, Fix the Criminal Justice System. And the easiest way to find it is to simply go onto Amazon and do a search term for the name of the book. And it's very inexpensive, by the way.
Right, yeah.
I think it's $9 for the book and maybe $4 for the
ebook
$3.
and stuff. Yeah.
Is it $3?
$3
Okay.
for the Kindle.
Yeah. Well, I think the purpose was not to make money necessarily, but to get this message out to as many people as possible.
Less than a venti caramel macchiato.
That's right.
Not the drip coffee that I buy, but yeah.
So I want to go back, and we normally don't really, discuss too much in politics, but obviously it's important because it's part of your views, the conservative views. And I guess it's, is it wise to advise people to really research who they would vote for because of, how do you get started on this? I know you guys have some drug courts and mental courts around the state, but how do we really get it involved to make it better?
I think voters each have issues that are important to them. Criminal justice may not be one of the top priorities for most people.
Sure.
But there's been a lot of press regarding Governor Deal and what he's done here. There have been other governors, both Democrat and Republican, across the nation who are doing the same thing. So I think an in-depth, intelligent voter is going to look pretty deep into each candidate and see what they've done in the past. I believe whoever our next governor is going to be is going to probably do nothing but do more in this area because it's been so successful and it's been so politically popular to do. Our West Georgia delegation, our senators, and all of our representatives are totally on board with what Deal has done here. And but you asked about other aspects with conservatism in this book. I talk about things like gun rights. I'm a huge Second Amendment person. If you look on my Facebook page, you'll see picture of me and my son.
And look at him, he's shaking his head.
Yeah, he loves guns. Yeah, I talk about when you're convicted of a felony in Georgia, you lose the right to possess a firearm. And there's a difference between being convicted of aggravated assault under the Family Violence Act and a forgery. Why should a person who's convicted of forgery lose their Second Amendment rights? It just doesn't make any sense. I think that's something that will be taken up soon by the General Assembly. May not be this year, but I have talked with Senator Dugan, Representative Hightower, Representative Cook. Those are some of our guys there in the Douglas County, Carroll County area, and they're totally on board with that.
So, Dane, tell me a little bit on, like, some of the things that you guys have discussed and what your views, because obviously you do agree with a lot of what he says. So what are some of your views
surprisingly, I do. When I started, when I was younger, I was really involved in party politics. And at college and undergraduate, I was the head of the College Democrats, and I worked really hard, unsuccessfully, to get President Kerry elected, which that didn't happen.
We had a President Kerry?
No, unfortunately we didn't. But so I didn't know Jason that well, except for being in court with him. He came into court one day with a tie with President Reagan on it, and that told me a little bit. I said, I like your tie. I don't agree with much of what he did, but I like your fortitude to come into court with that. But so, I didn't know much about his politics, but when he told me, or he let me know that there was an opening and he was considering hiring an associate, I went and met with him. And honestly, there's some social issues that he and I just are not going to ever coalesce.
Sure.
But when it comes to criminal defense, for
across
different
the
reasons,
board, it all makes sense.
Yes, everything he's saying makes sense, especially when bringing it back to the fiscal responsibility. I mean, $50 billion. I mean, rivaling Medicaid. This just doesn't make any sense for anyone, be you a liberal or conservative. So, when it comes to that, we get along swimmingly. But
it keeps it interesting.
That's right, and it's good for our clients to come in.
That balance, big
that's
time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he's got a painting of President Reagan and a picture of Justice Thomas downstairs, and you come upstairs, and I've got a picture of President Lincoln. I'm going to get one of President Kennedy. So there's the dichotomy there between the two, and I think our clients enjoy that. They know that we can work together and be respectful of one another.
So where will you put Trump's picture?
I don't think either of us will be very excited.
No comment. That's the one time you can say no comment. That's fine. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. And you also probably are able to give both sides of the coin a lot of times, which helps.
Correct.
In a lot of situations. So that's great. And, we're kind of getting close to that time, but it was great having you guys here.
Well, thank you for having us. We enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
I love being exposed to what's really going on out there. And when I opened this book, I was just like, turn it on my phone.
Turned on the book, yeah.
Turned on the book.
Figuratively.
You going to do an audio book?
Yeah. Well, actually, David Wolf has agreed to do the audio.
Oh, the narration? Yeah. And we have a gentleman here in the studio, Craig Williams, with Authority, Global Authority, and they can help you make a best-selling book. Yeah, so
there we go.
Check with him after the show. But we do want to kind of visit with our guests one more time.
But first, I wanted them to definitely make sure they tell our listeners how that they can reach them. there's any criminals listening.
Well, or family
Or
members.
family members of
Once
alleged-
again, don't
alleged
come by the
criminals.
studio. Go to their office. Yeah. And speak-
Alleged and accused.
That's
Remember,
right.
we use that language.
Yes.
There are a lot of ways. You can Google us, and we're pretty well on the map there. But the simplest way is to go to our website, which is www.swindlelaw.com, and that's SWINDLELAW.com.
That is kind of funny now that I think about
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
you
I
never,
know.
you never connected those dots. All right.
I did. I just
So we will visit with each of our guests, maybe closing statements and contact information. So, gentlemen, thanks for being here.
or
Thank
any
you.
comments
Thank
for any questions for any other guests on the show?
Yeah, follow-up questions.
Comments or questions for anybody?
I've
Go-
just really
go
enjoyed
Knowles.
this.
Well,
I've really enjoyed the exchange. I've learned a lot from the estate planning attorney and the criminal defense attorneys. It's
Well, I
always
have
nice.
too, and one thing I noticed was the passion that everybody has for their respective practices, because we all have very diverse practices in here too, and it's nice to see and meet new lawyers who do love what they do.
I see it every week, and it
because-
really has changed my view of lawyers
For the better, I hope.
Well, yeah.
for the better.
I'll just say that I taught at 2 boarding schools, and you can send a kid to a very nice boarding school for the cost of putting one person in prison for a year.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's
That's a good
amazing the
point.
economics of it.
That's a good
Absolutely.
point.
That is absolutely.
I'm just looking for that that money to come down from the helicopter there. Whatever. I think it's arrived now. Yeah.
I'm on it.
I'm on it.
Right,
Wait
it's
on it.
upstairs. I'll meet you upstairs. Yeah. So again, let our listeners know the point of contact for you,
James?
James.
Oh, I'm at gawillsandestates.com.
And Lisa?
SimpsonHooverLaw.com.
Oh, that's right.
OJ and the president.
Right.
Talk about criminal law. Okay, and Swindle? Law?
Yeah, it's swindlelaw.com.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening and tuning in. And thanks again to our sponsors, 3A Law Practice Management, Peachtree Offices, and John Marshall Law School. You can see this show very soon on Atlanta Legal Experts, or listen to this show on Atlanta Legal
You
Experts.
didn't tell me there were cameras here.
Yeah. By the way, yeah, for legal reasons.
This is Emily Rowell with Peachtree Offices signing out.
Thank you again for joining Emily Rowell and her guests on the Pro Business Channel. Use the social media links here to share today's show, and stay tuned for the next episode of Atlanta Legal Experts Radio.